Wait, don't scroll past this. I know the title sounds like something your health teacher nervously rushed through in 7th grade, but this is not that. This is one of the most overlooked rabbit holes in all of human history. We're talking about something half the human population has dealt with literally since the beginning of time, hundreds of thousands of years. And historians have basically given it 0 pages. Like, we have entire documentaries about how Romans built their roads. But how did a Roman woman manage her period while also running a household? Nothing. Crickets. That ends today. We're going to Egypt, Greece, Rome, China, the Aztecs. And trust me, some of what ancient men believed about this topic will genuinely make your jaw drop. Let's get into it. First things first, menstruation is not a modern discovery, obviously. But you'd be surprised how many ancient cultures treated it like some kind of supernatural event rather than basic biology. And that confusion, that mix of fear, reverence, and absolute nonsense, shaped women's lives across civilizations for thousands of years. Here's the thing. It wasn't really about the materials women used, because cloth existed everywhere. Wool existed everywhere. Sponges existed. Women figured out practical solutions pretty quickly. The real story is the cultural story, because depending on how your civilization answered one question, is this sacred or is this dangerous, your whole life as a woman looked completely different. Let's start with Egypt. And honestly, Egypt is the hero here. Ancient Egyptians are one of the first civilizations with actual written medical records. And some of those records, going all the way back to 1550 BCE, include gynecological documentation. They weren't ignoring this. They were studying it. Egyptian women most likely used softened papyrus or rolls of soft linen as early pads. Linen was absorbent, reusable, washable. Very practical, very Egyptian. This is the same civilization that invented calendars, architecture, and dental fillings. But here's what makes Egypt stand out. Menstruation wasn't shameful there. It was connected to fertility, to the goddess Isis, to the flooding of the Nile, which was literally the heartbeat of their civilization. Women weren't isolated. They weren't considered dangerous. Life continued. Now compare that to what ancient Greece was cooking up, and you'll understand why Egypt deserves its flowers. Okay, ancient Greece, democracy, philosophy, mathematics. Also, some of the most confidently wrong ideas about the human body ever written down. Let's talk about Aristotle, legend, celebrated genius, and also the guy who wrote that menstrual blood was basically failed semen. His actual theory was that women's bodies tried to produce semen just like men did, but because women were naturally colder and weaker, the process failed. And that failure, that was menstruation. This was not a fringe idea. This was mainstream scientific consensus for centuries. Now, setting aside what Greek men were writing in their philosophy scrolls, what were women actually doing? Greek women most likely used soft wool fashioned into pads or small internal plugs. Historians have found medical texts referencing exactly this. There's also evidence of cloth belts and loincloths used to hold absorbent material in place. What's wild is the contradiction. On one hand, Hippocrates himself wrote about menstruation as a completely normal bodily function. Missed periods were treated as a medical problem. On the other hand, Aristotle, confidently explaining that women are just broken men. Very Greek energy, brilliant and unhinged at the same time. Then there's Rome. Rome gave us aqueducts, concrete, legal systems, and also Pliny the Elder. Pliny wrote a 37-volume encyclopedia, and his section on menstruation is truly something. According to Pliny, if a woman on her period walked through a field, she could kill the crops. Touch a sword? Blunted. Touch wine? Vinegar. Get near bees? Dead bees. He also claimed she could rust iron, blacken bronze, and, my personal favorite, repel whirlwinds. Ancient Rome basically believed menstruating women were walking environmental disasters. Obviously, regular Roman women did not believe they were personally responsible for agricultural catastrophes. They went to markets, attended temples, raised kids. Life continued. Roman women most likely used soft cloth, wool, or sea sponges. The Mediterranean had easy access to natural sponges, absorbent, soft, reusable after washing, practical. One more thing about Rome that's worth noting, wealth mattered a lot here. Wealthy Roman women had access to fine linen and household help for washing materials. Poor women used whatever rough cloth was available. That gap between wealthy women and ordinary women, it runs through every single civilization we're talking about today. Before we keep moving, we need to talk about taboo, because this is the thread that connects almost every culture on Earth. In ancient Jewish law, a menstruating woman was considered ritually impure. She couldn't be touched. Objects she touched became impure. Ritual purification through a mikveh bath was required before she could resume normal life. Ancient Hindu texts warned that a man who was intimate with a menstruating woman would lose his wisdom, energy, strength, sight, and longevity. Solid deterrent. Ancient Zoroastrian texts went even further. Menstruating women had to be isolated, given limited food, and denied contact with fire, water, and the earth itself. And across indigenous cultures in the Americas, Africa, and Asia, many women temporarily lived in dedicated spaces during their cycles, moon lodges. Now here's the nuance. In some traditions, this was about danger or impurity, but in others, it was about the woman's heightened spiritual power during this time. She wasn't being punished, she was being set apart. The framing changed everything. Traditional Chinese medicine had a genuinely remarkable relationship with the female body. Unlike Greek or Roman medicine, which kept framing women as inferior, broken men, Chinese medicine treated the female body as a complete system, different from male, but not lesser. Menstruation was actually a diagnostic tool. The timing, color, and consistency of flow were all used by physicians to assess overall health. We're talking detailed medical texts from the Han Dynasty, 200 BCE, discussing menstrual irregularity and its causes. Practically, Chinese women used soft cloth pads made from silk or cotton held in place by woven belts. By the Tang Dynasty, around 600 to 900 CE, there's evidence of undergarments with integrated fabric pouches for absorbent material. That's functionally an ancestor of the modern reusable pad. In 600 CE, here's where history gets frustratingly thin, because the Aztecs, the Maya, the Inca, and hundreds of indigenous nations across the Americas had rich, complex medical traditions. But colonization destroyed so much of the written and oral record that what we know is fragmentary. What we do know is that Aztec women appear to have used maguey fibers, the same plant that gives us agave, as absorbent material. Maguey was used for everything in Mesoamerican culture: food, fiber, medicine, alcohol. Using it for menstrual management fits completely. And in many North American indigenous traditions, the moon lodge wasn't punishment. Women in many cultures were considered to be at their most spiritually powerful during this time. They'd return from the lodge having completed another cycle, with renewed status in the community. Here's a fact that genuinely surprises most people. The modern disposable menstrual pad wasn't invented until 1888, a product called Lister's Towels by Johnson & Johnson, and it flopped because Victorian women were too embarrassed to buy it from a male pharmacist at the counter. It wasn't until 1921 when Kotex reframed the whole thing as a hygiene product rather than a personal embarrassment that mass adoption finally happened. The modern pad is barely 100 years old. That's a blink in human history. So what's the actual lesson here? Women were never passive victims of their biology. Across every civilization, across thousands of years, women developed real, practical solutions to a universal physical reality. They used what was available. They refined techniques. They passed knowledge down through generations. The material solutions were often the same everywhere: cloth, wool, plant fiber, sponges. The cultural consequences were radically different depending on how each society chose to frame it. And most of that practical, generational, real-world knowledge, it lived in communities of women. It was almost never written down by the people who actually had it. Meanwhile, Pliny was over there writing confidently about whirlwinds. We have museums dedicated to ancient weapons. We reconstruct battle formations in painstaking detail. But the daily, lived experience of half the population, universal, constant, across every civilization that ever existed, barely shows up in mainstream history. That's what this channel is here for. See you in the next one.